how did you get the job working at Lamborghini?
Because at that point, everybody who was good enough at selling cars had generally gone off to sell mortgages because it was a much better business in like 06, 07, 08. And it was so hard to sell the cars that they were just looking for anybody. And the fact that I had a little bit more of an understanding of the economics of ownership, as that was becoming a much bigger part of the ways that they were talking people through the deals, you really had to help them to understand how much this was going to cost them. There was no longer this fantasy of like endless demand and endless availability of funds, kind of a similar period to what we're having right now, where, in the wake of COVID, every new car sold out immediately. There was no inventory, cheap cars, expensive cars, whatever. And so we were kind of in this moment, much like now, where you really had to sell the car. And I loved that. I loved working deals and negotiating and trying to help listen and understand what a buyer wanted and fitting that into the logic I needed them to accept in order to make the decision to buy what I had.
And what are the finances behind selling vehicles? I feel like there are a lot of things that people think happen but don't actually happen. I could be completely wrong here, but I feel like the sales rep always goes, they talk to the seller. They have a base price that they can sell it at. They're making a little bit on the spread, but they can also sell it as high as they want. And then they take that, the larger portion of fat, if there's, more meat on the bone in the deal.
Yeah, so there's a ton of different pay plans in car dealerships. For us, it was a 25% commission of the gross profit. We didn't get paid anything on the back end of the finance reserve and stuff like that, because there's obviously dozens and dozens of ways that a car dealer can make money in a transaction. But, that spread between wholesale and retail is going to create this theoretical margin that you could have, and you want to retain as much gross profit as you can as a salesperson because you're making a big percentage of that. It's very different than a real estate agent that's getting paid a percentage of the entire transaction value. So a real estate agent really doesn't care how much they sell your house for. They just want more deals, because the difference in their commission of if they sell it for your asking price or 85% of that is not that big of a difference. And so they just want an easy deal that gets done fast. They're not that heavily incentivized to maximize your selling price. And so in the car business, that matters a good bit more because you're getting paid lower dollar figures and it's being calculated of different values. So, we would probably average about 6 to 8% as a gross margin. And the dealership a successful exotic car dealership is usually operating on a 1 to 3% net margin after everybody's paid out. Mm-hmm. So they flow an insane amount of cash because the dollar amounts are so high, but they're really not wildly profitable. And it's very easy for them to take massive, massive lumps. And so when I joined the dealership, we would look at some of these deals that they'd done in the prior year, and they were losing $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on a car because the market had shifted so abruptly in the early days of the recession that there was just nothing they could do. And there were some unscrupulous and untoward things that had happened with the dealership in the year prior, of people that were trying to steal money and bury too much money in inventory and stuff like that. And so that had exaggerated the problem to some extent. But usually there's going to be some kind of a cap. It's because if you can make a lot more than $10,000 or $20,000 on a car, that's really because of the way the dealership works and the opportunity that exists in the car being available to the market, more so than your work as a salesperson. And so our cap was $4,000 a car. And usually dealerships have what's called PAC, meaning this is a non-commissionable portion of a profit that is assigned as a cost to any car. In our case, it was about $750. And so I would always pencil the deals to make $16,750 because that was me getting every dollar, and there were no non-commissionable dollars in this transaction. And they didn't love that, but nobody else was creating these margins. And so I would sell usually anywhere from, 8 to 15 cars a month. And you don't max it out all that often, but I think my best month ever was about 50 grand, and probably my best year ever was about 350. And at the time, I don't know anybody at that point, before 2015, that was making more than me selling exotic cars. There might have been some small-time brokers that were just doing these massive deals or stuff like that. But that was obviously massively more money than I ever thought I'd make in my life. And so it was a very wild time.
So who's buying Lamborghinis? What type of person walks in?
Well, there was always that stereotype of the Miami Vice chest hair and pet alligator and a white blazer. And I guess my top buttons don't tend to work as well as they should. And I do have a pet boa constrictor, but that's not as accurate as it seems like. But I would say that really it was small to medium-sized business owners that had grown up dreaming about the cars and weren't really sure what it took to afford them. I loved people that were financing cars because they traded a lot more often, and it was a lot easier for them to accept a few $100 more a month in their payment than having to pay a huge delta when they would try to upgrade to the next thing. So I gravitated towards people that were very aspirational and didn't mind massive car loans, a lot like myself, because I could speak with a lot of authority to that. And you don't necessarily want to always think of you're selling to your peers or you're trying to be equal to your customer. But, like I did a sales training thing with an Audi dealership last week where, they were really worried about, as the cars got so much more expensive, just what they would say. And I'm like, look, they don't want you to be equal, but they do want you to be the expert on this knowledge gap that they have as they're honestly coming to a dealership trying to get advice. And so, I learned everything there was to know about exotic car financing. I knew everything there was to know about the product. And so they were never going to run into someone who was more equipped to help them through the transaction that they wanted to do. After I left the dealership, it seemed like every life insurance company wants a retired car salesman or no longer selling cars, car salesman to come and sell their stuff. And I'm like, man, I get it. And I know everybody needs life insurance, but I've been selling stuff that people really, really want, but know they don't need. And you want me to sell something that people know they probably need, but they really don't want to deal with. And I'm not sure that's the sales paradigm shift that I'm really looking for right now. But yeah, I mean, that was really it, is guys that, have made their own money and want to go out and have this trophy and have this experience. And I always wanted them to go drive them as much as possible because that was always my personal mindset. But yeah.
What car were you driving at the time?
When I started, I still had the rental car fleet as I was selling them off. And then for a long time, I just had an old Mercedes that I would drive around. I was always trying to find one that was like depreciated enough or cheap enough or whatever. And so I'm, always trying to buy our trades and stuff like that with crazy car loans. But in 2011, I kind of bought the first personal car Lamborghini, and it was a blue Chalhoub 2004 Gallardo that came in on a tow truck. And it was not running, and it was in really rough condition. And there were these two Asian truck drivers that didn't speak English, and we thought they were kind of asking us to figure out what was wrong with the car. We really didn't know, and so we just ran it through the shop, and it was leaking oil terribly. Brakes, tires, everything was spent. Clutch was gone, but it was an okay car. It was in one piece. I checked the Carfax. It had a minor accident, but didn't look too bad. The paintwork was decent, but we really didn't know. And they'd left us a phone number with this car, and it was like, nobody answered, or it didn't go through, whatever. And so a few days go by, and this guy shows up and he goes, "Do y'all have a blue Lamborghini here that you're trying to fix?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we do." And I would normally greet people that walk towards service. And he said, "Well, it's not mine, but it belongs to my girlfriend's daughter, and she's really attractive." And I'm okay, that will not change our level of service, sir, but it's always nice to know. And I said, "Well, can we speak to her?" He's like, "Well, no, you can't talk to her, but I'll get you in touch with her mom." Okay. And so a couple days later, I give him my card. The mom calls, and she says that her daughter had gotten arrested for going 180 miles an hour in this car. And I'm like, wow, okay, well, that's pretty meaningful. But it meant that the car recently was able to go 180 miles an hour, which is a promising thing. And the car was so rough at that time, trying to sell bad condition exotic cars was nearly impossible because dealerships weren't trying to put much in inventory. The economy was still recovering. We couldn't sell the nice stuff, much less rats like this. And so I was like, man, this thing might get cheap. And I knew that if I was willing to try, I was not going to be bidding against anybody. And I also suspected that there was a good chance that whenever we found this girl, that she was not going to be able to pay what was probably going to be a $20,000 to $30,000 service bill. And so the only way we were ever going to get the service business was for me to buy the car and finance it into a loan because I didn't have the cash either. And I could tell from the Carfax that there was not a lien against it. So a lot of times when you buy these cars cheap, it doesn't matter if they're willing to let you have it cheap, they can't pay off their loan. That would have been much more. And so it was probably another week, and this girl shows up. And she was a prostitute, and she was not appealing to my demographic, I think, as a target, whatever. But she came in, and I actually found her social media profile, and it said that she had 50-inch hips. So, I mean, this girl could take a break hula hooping. I mean, it was a marvel of science. And so we're talking about the car, and she said that she had bought it about a year earlier in cash in Miami. And I came to find out it was cash that she had earned in 3 months of work. So she was churning some business through. And she was not in a position to do it, but she did have the title, and she wanted to sell it. And I had asked my boss, like, if I can buy it, is that okay? Like, sometimes that's iffy as a dealership employee if this is going to be all right. And so he's like, yeah, sure. If you can get it done and you'll give us a service business, do whatever you want. And so she wanted like $70,000 because, she thinks, well, it'll be worth what I paid for it. I said, not exactly. There's also these other million things wrong with it and stuff like that. And I explained to her why it was less. And I offered her $30,000. And of course, she was a shrewd negotiator. So we met right smack dab in the middle at $30,000. And so I'm like, all right, well, do you want to buy another car? Obviously, if somebody just doesn't have a car. And she's like, well, I'd really like a Bentley like Paris Hilton's, a pink one. I said, well, they don't really paint them pink, so we probably don't want to do that. We could wrap a car. Let me look. And we could get, at the time, you could buy a Continental GT for probably 40, 50 grand. And I'm like, well, let's just go see if we can get you a loan for the rest. And she's great. She fills out our credit app. She had her social security card with her. And we pulled her credit, and nobody had ever even looked at this girl's credit. She didn't even know she had a bank account, anything like that. And I learned that in particular after we found out that there was nobody wanting to be the first person to loan her money in her short life at that point. And because I was like, well, we'll just give you a check. And so I went back to our office. We cut her a check for $30,000, and I handed it to her. And I, as a car salesman, had never had somebody look at me with less trust than when I told her that piece of paper was the same thing as $30,000. And she's like, what do I do with this? Oh, you take it to your bank. Said, what? I said, can you not just give me cash? I said, no, we don't have cash here, but I promise you it's good. And she left like super suspicious, like there's no way this is money. And it worked out. We stayed in touch. In fact, she had the spare key to the car, and she kept telling me she was going to bring it, and she never would, or she'd come up with some excuse. And must have been 3 months later, she texted me and she's like, it's my birthday tomorrow, do you still want that key? I'm like, again, like I'm getting a lot of unrelated information in this deal. And I said, happy birthday. And yes, I'd love it. And she's like, well, can I have $100 for it? I'm like, well, it's not worth anything to anybody but me, but you know what? Sure. By all means, but I'll give you $100 if you have it here by close of business. And she didn't show up, of course. But the next day, her birthday, she showed up, and I don't know what she would call what she was wearing. I would call it a basketball net. Mm-hmm. It holes everywhere. You could see everything. She had a lot of interesting tattoos in interesting places that were probably uncomfortable to acquire. And she walks in. At the time, there was this woman standing at our parts counter with this young kid. She grabs this kid and screams and runs out another door. And Kimmy walks up to me, and she loves to hug. I always want to hug you first. And so I'm like, hey, Kimmy, what are you all dressed up for? And she said, it's my birthday. I said, well, you're halfway to that outfit. And I said, you got the key? She did. And I went out and tried it and gave her money. And I was like, man, we had had a lot of conversations at that point. She was like commenting on my Instagram posts. She was really fond of the ones that had my large albino boa constrictor in it. But we were sitting at my desk talking. I said, Kimmy, do you have butt implants? Like, how does this happen? And she's like, no. And she was so excited to like talk me through the science of this. She's like, I had a fat redistribution. And this was before like the Kardashian world of this was a thing. Yeah. And so she's like, they made me gain 30 pounds, and then they liposuctioned it all out, and they injected it. She didn't have to move anything. You could see the scar. It must have been a jackhammer they put it in with. And it was, and I said, wow. And so not only did I get to buy the cheapest Gallardo ever, but I got to meet the recipient of such a pioneering medical procedure.